You ready?
I'm ready.
You're ready. How much do you know about dog training? Have you looked at some of our resources and stuff? Is the 5 pillars somewhat familiar to you? Slightly? Okay. Well, you interrupt me if there's anything and you're just like, no, I already got this. Like, we're good.
The first thing I need you to do is tell me the words, because y'all use
Yes.
a whole different language.
Absolutely.
That makes no sense.
Absolutely. And as we go through all that, and I made sure to write it all out in the go home packet of like what break and climb and heel and, all these other, terminology that we use. So, so we'll go ahead and get started. So this is my huge thing that I always talk about whenever it comes to dog training. You must have these 5 things, and they are all interdependent upon one another. They are in no particular order. One cannot exist without the others in order to successfully train your dog. So going through these. The first one that I'm going to go over is going to be timing. And I like to go over timing first because I think that this is the really big ding aha moment for owners. So timing in dog training is a very, very small window where dogs can correlate if their behavior was good or bad, and good or bad in relation to what we deem as good or bad. It's really important to note that for dogs, there is no good or bad behavior. All choices that dogs make, they are only ever trying to better their own situation. So that being said, when a dog does something good, say for example, the time window that we have to reinforce as in make sure that behavior occurs again in the future is 1.3 seconds. Technically, there will be people out there that will say, oh, well, it's actually 1.3 to 1.6 seconds. That's a very small window of time. And I will get into how we can actually increase that amount of time. So let's say, for example, you are with Hank and you're working with him. And let's say that you're really struggling with his down, okay? So you say, Hank, down, and he immediately goes into the down position, and then you just kind of wait, and you're outside, you wait like 3 seconds, and then you say, oh, good job, and then you give him a reward. You're way outside of that period of time. And like I said, I'll go over how we can expand that more. Let's say, for example, that you are in the living room over here, and he's over there in the kitchen, and he decides to jump up onto the counter, because counter surfing was his thing. So he jumps up onto the counter, and then he does that, and then he puts his paws back onto the ground, and you say, no, don't do that. You've already missed your opportunity, and you're so far away from him. How are you going to reinforce that was an incorrect behavior? So everything that we do, it needs to be within that time frame. And this is where they're like, oh, well, my dog chews up this thing, and when I come into the room, they act all guilty. They know that it was something wrong. But the thing is that dogs can read human body language better than humans can read, human body language. So you'll walk into the room, you'll see it, and immediately your pulse will change, your posture will change, and the dog goes, oh, I know what that is. I am in trouble. But you cannot punish the dog for that destructive behavior because they have zero idea what happened. Even if they give submissive signs, it's because we're upset and they can sense that, if that makes sense. So timing is what we call an art form in dog training, the art of timing. The next thing is, what do you use with your timing? When it comes to motivation, all dogs are going to have positive or negative motivation. And so when it comes to positive motivation, there's typically going to be 3 things. There is going to be toys, food, and affection. Those are going to be your 3 primary reinforcers. And when I say reinforcers, I just mean that whatever makes the behavior occur more frequently in the future. So with your positive motivation, we're all very familiar with that. He's food motivated. He's been working for his kibble, but then he also enjoys toys as well, but he's a sucker for affection too, which makes a dog like Hank makes it really easy to train. When you don't have food or toys on you, giving affection for him is going to be very highly reinforcing. Now, when it comes to negative motivation, think of this as the equivalent of you miss a deadline, so you're not going to get paid. You don't go to work, you're not going to get a paycheck. You don't, eat right, you're going to gain weight, whatever it may be. And so with negative motivation, it is whatever the dog finds aversive of whatever they're like. I would rather avoid that because I don't want to do it. In training, when I get into our clear communication system, we are going to use our verbal markers, which is going to be yes, no, and good. Those are going to be our marker words. And we're going to use the e-collar or the leash or the prong or just spatial pressure. So spatial pressure just means that moving towards the dog into their space. It's a form of negative motivation for them. So this is just pretty much good feelings, bad feelings. That's all that there is. So when you get to timing, it's you choose one of these things within this time window to get the behavior that you want, if that makes sense. So yeah.
What is Hank's primary negative motivation?
I would say his primary negative motivation is probably, he's pretty equal when it comes to all of them. I would say that maybe like a tap from the e-collar, he gets very much into like his own zone in his own world, which you're probably very familiar with. So when something catches his attention, it's just the world stops and he's like, I must look at this, right? And so when you just like want his attention, I'm like, no, it's time to go. And just kind of like giving him a tap from the e-collar, just kind of like, time to go. And he's like, oh, right, time to go. So I would say that's probably it. And I would say that that's going to be it for most dogs because it's a very novel or like foreign sensation to them. Obviously he knows it by now, but I would say that it's the most clear form of communication for him, that he understands it the most and what's expected of him. So there's not any gray area. It's just very black and white for him. So I would say for that. So the next thing is going to be consistency. So while timing can be frustrating at times because you have a very small window, consistency is really the challenge for, I think, almost all owners, because this is going to be your equivalent of, not eating healthy consistently, not going to the gym consistently, not washing your face, all these good things that we want to happen in our lives involve a level of consistency. And dogs learn the same way that humans learn, is just through repetitions and patterns, but that's also how they unlearn as well without having all of these repetitions and patterns. So this is the most challenging one, but if you can make it a really easy flow into your everyday life, then it's really not that challenging. If just like every day, like when you wake up, you get Hank out of the crate, you put his claw on him, and the first thing that you do is you just let him go potty, and then you just head off on a walk. And every day is just like a part of your routine. The kids want something, it's like, yeah, put a pin in that. Hank needs to go out for a walk, and then I'll come back and we'll handle that your brother hit you, whatever. If it's anything like my family growing up, that was always a thing. So yeah, consistency is just what routine can you easily put into your day? And everyone's routine is going to look much different dependent on their life. And it's important that we pattern train our dogs to fit that pattern. For some people, they're really busy from 7 a.m. until 5 p.m. So their dog needs to be in a calm and controlled state of mind. But then, after 5 p.m., it's like, hey, me and you, I have all the attention, that I can give to you. Now you can be a dog and be all crazy and stuff, and we'll go outside to do that. But when you're inside the house, you forget that you're a dog. The minute that you remember that you're a dog, we're going to have a little discussion here, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So the next thing is going to be clear communication. So we have our verbal markers. And then we also have our tools. So our verbal markers are going to be good, it's going to be no, and it's going to be break. And all of this is in your packet too. So our verbal markers is how we are going to extend this period of time. Let's say, for example, that I'm working with a long line with Hank and he's over there, right? So he's all the way over there, and I tell him down, and he downs. I cannot get to him in 1.3 seconds to reinforce that, right? But what I can say is I can say good. And through training, he understands, oh, the behavior that I'm doing, I must continue doing the behavior. So good is a please continue to do that. I like what you're doing. So I can say good, and then I can walk over to him, and then I can deliver his reinforcement, and then I can go away, right? So good is just telling the dog, continue to do what you're doing. No is obviously going to be, just like you're doing it incorrectly. So if I'm all the way over here and then I tell him down and he does it, but then he gets up from it, I could say no. and then he knows, oh, I wasn't supposed to get up from the down position, and then he can either do one of two things. He can either go back down into the position, or I can go and I can just fix him, and I can go over to him and I say, no, down, and just give him a little bit of guidance. So it's just when you do something incorrect, which is pretty easy. Break is going to be a break from the behavior, which is pretty easy as well. So he's sitting over there, and then when I say, okay, then we're just done training, you can go do whatever it is that you want to do, I can say break, and he's free to come and do whatever. But that doesn't, there's a difference in between break and come. So some people start to use break as the one that they want their dog to come to them. Break is a release from all behaviors. You are free to do dog things, whatever it is that you want to do. Yeah, questions about markers, because we'll use those a lot.
Is that all of them?
For when we want to tell their dog if they're doing something good or bad. Okay. The behavior, yeah, that's all of them. Just good, no, and break. So good, duration, break is going to be your release, all that good stuff. Next, for clear communication, we're going to take a lot of time to talk about our tools. That way you have a really good, solid understanding of them. And our tools in dog training they're going to be more than just your leash and your e-collar and all this other stuff. Your tools are also going to be your attitude in training. It's going to be your food. It's going to be your body language. Dogs are all about body language. The way that dogs learn is they first learn physical, and then visual, and then verbal. So we want to keep this in mind when we are training our dogs, that we can talk at them as much as possible, but their first way of learning about things is going to be physical. That's why we use a leash a lot, because that's the only thing that provides physical guidance to the dog. The e-collar doesn't, our words don't, our treats don't. Only the leash can actually guide the dog of where you want to go. You can say, go left, as much as you want, but it's not until you use the leash to actually go left. And then visual as well, which is where our body language comes into play. So a lot of the time, people get really frustrated of like, oh, I told my dog to climb, but maybe you are over here and the dog is over there, and maybe they're not used to having the dog bed in that position, right? And you say, okay, climb, and then they're kind of like looking around, they're like, I don't really understand what that means. You would want to, instead of just using your visual words, or your verbal words, you would want to go over and use your body language and kind of like guide them up onto the dog bed, right? So using our physical presence, that's going to be a tool in our training. But for the most part, we are going to use our leash, our e-collar, our treats, and our words. Questions about that? We'll get into it a lot. Okay, cool. The very last thing is going to be relationship and leadership. So what all of these things really help create is relevancy to our dogs. Through relationship and leadership, it is going to be your love and your affection and your physical caretaking for the dog, but it's also going to be the thing that all beings need in order to live a happy and healthy life, which is going to be structure, boundaries, and accountability. I think that you're going to find a pretty easy time with training because you already have 4 boys, right? There has to be some level of boundaries, there has to be some level of structure for them, and they must be accountable for the actions. And we want to transfer that mindset and thinking onto our dogs, not treating them as human children, but the method that you take when it comes to rearing children onto our dogs. So when it comes to structure, this is just the rhythm and flow of the day for the dog, right? It's a predictable thing. Like when it comes to your kids, they pretty much know, like, when I wake up in the morning, what are the first things I need to do? Is it make my bed? Is it brush my teeth? Is it go downstairs for breakfast? Whatever. And then they have certain boundaries. You don't go into your brother's room, or you don't go into mom's office, or, you don't put your shoes on the couch. There's boundaries. And so it's going to be the same thing for our dogs as well. So structure is just going to be like your home routine. Boundaries are going to be the things like you're going to be in your crate, like at night, and when we're not home, we're going to have no furniture for a time being. And then we are going to also do things like no getting up onto like the counter and no barking and no hyperactivity and things like that. There's boundaries and accountability of when I tell you to do something, I do expect that you do that thing, and just enforcing that. Because the same thing, like when it comes to children, you can say, oh, like if you don't, do your homework, then you're not gonna have a cell phone, for a week. And then you don't actually take away the cell phone for a week. It's like, how much of a leader are you? How strong is our relationship where I can trust you with things? And this is developing trust. So those are pretty much the 5 pillars in a nutshell, which is kind of a lot. So what questions do you have about that so far? None? Cool, sweet. Okay, so the next thing that I want to go over is some of the different tools that we are going to be using. The first one that I want to go over is leash management, because the leash is going to be your best friend, especially when I start talking about the reintegration period. So with the leash, 90% of the information is transferred from the leash down to your dog. Like I said, because it is directional, right? So we need to be able to hold our leashes correctly whenever we are with our dogs. For the most part, most of us that have dogs that are not trained, we get really used to the leash being completely extended at 6 feet, and we're just kind of like holding on for dear life, just kind of doing one of these things and just being like, I got you, right? So we are going to, now that he knows where he needs to be, we need to be able to communicate with him as much as possible. And when it comes to our tools, it will sometimes feel a little odd for you of just being like, I feel like maybe like I'm, using the leash too much, or like I'm pressing the e-collar a lot, or whatever it may be. And you should be using your tools as much as necessary, but as little as possible. So like use them as much as you have to, but if you don't have to, then just like don't use them, if that makes sense. So the first thing when it comes to a leash, so we have our dog here. Our dogs are going to walk on our left-hand side. I'm going to go over walking first. So our dogs are going to be here on our left-hand side. On a leash, there is this brass metal part, okay? And that is going to be attached to the dog's collar. Now, when our dogs are walking, we optimally want this J sort of shape in our leash, okay? We have a little bit of slack, but we don't have a full 6 feet. So we have a little bit of slack just like that. And this brass metal part is pointing downwards, okay? The moment that this brass part starts to go upwards, you're starting to get too much tension on the leash. And tension on the leash is communication to our dogs. So if there's constant tension, we can't actively communicate. But if it's loose like this all the time and then you want to get their attention, this is actually a very powerful communication tool to the dog. So that's what we want to do there. So that's attached to our dog, and this is going to be here like that. So what we want to do with our left hand is we want to pretend like the leash is going through our hand like this, and it's coming out the back of our hand, just like that, and we're holding it just like this, right? Just super relaxed, and your hands are staying below your waist. With your other hand, it's not too super important. A lot of people are really comfortable just slipping the leash through their hand like this, and then just taking up the rest of the slack like this. Some people are more comfortable with looping the leash like this and just holding it like that. So it's really up to you. Just the most important thing is what you are doing on your left-hand side, that there's not too much leash and that you are holding it correctly. Some people will accidentally start holding it like this, and it's really hard to communicate to the dog when it kind of has like a kink in it. You kind of see what I mean? Yeah. So you kind of want to hold it just like this. Now, you do want that little bit of slack in here, but one of the important things to remember is that if you are holding the leash with a lot of slack, we'll just pretend we are holding the leash here like this. If your dog goes in front of you like this, they can get way in front of you, right? And we are communicating through our leash, so if your dog is all the way in front of you, you have to swing your arm back really far in order to put any tension on the leash to communicate with them. So we do want some slack, but we want enough that our arm movement is just a little bit back, or it's just kind of like a flick wrist, which I'll show you how to do. But questions about that so far? And it'll just be like hands-on practice, which you'll definitely be able to do. So that's going to be our leash when it comes to walking. I also recommend leash management in the house as well, especially for the first couple of days that he's going to be back. I think he'll get into a really good rhythm, the first week that he's back. But one of the things that you want to ensure is that since none of our tools except for the leash is directional, when he goes back home, he's gonna be like, yes, my old environment, I want to do all these things. I always have it like akin to going to like summer. Did you ever go to summer camp? Did your boys ever go to summer camp or anything? Well, I think that maybe like we've like seen like a video or something, you understand what summer camp. So you go to summer camp, and at least the one that I went to Vacation Bible School. They had a very strict regimen, and they were just like, you're going to wake up when the trumpet plays at 7:00 a.m. And the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to get out of bed, and you are going to make your bed, and you are going to put on your uniform, and then you're going to go to the cafeteria, eat breakfast. And when you eat breakfast, you need to do X, Y, Z, come back, and you need to do, your assigned chores, whatever, right? Which was great. Had a lot of fun, a lot of structure. And then I came back home, and then the first thing that I did is like, oh my God, thank God I am back home. Kicked my shoes off, got all my toys out, played with it everywhere, and then didn't make my bed in the morning. And then my mom, wakes up and she's like, what are you doing? And I was like, eating breakfast? And she's like, why isn't your bed made? Why is your room a mess? And I was like, I've always done that. She's like, no. What you did at summer camp, you're still gonna do the same thing here. So anticipate that when Hank comes back, he's gonna be like, back from summer camp, and he's gonna be like, can't wait to do all these things, and you're gonna go, joke's on you, you're not gonna do that anymore. And the leash is going to really help us with that. So he's gotten pretty used to just dragging the leash around with him wherever he goes. So get him into the habit of doing that as well, and be really easy when he tries to get up onto the couch or to try and jump or anything like that. You can just be like, no, and then use the leash to guide him onto something more productive, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Leash management. Okay, the next thing is going to be the e-collar, which I feel like sometimes can seem a little bit intimidating, but we are going to break it down and make sure that it is not. The really, really important thing is to don't get focused on the numbers. I think that is probably like, in every profession, you kind of have that like, I wish people would not, don't do that thing.
Right.
A lot of other trainers get really obsessed over just like, and I'm training this dog and they respond on a level 1. And it's like, that's not something that it's not indicative of the trainer at all. It's, it's just kind of like, like my diet is going to be very different than your diet and what our bodies respond to. So don't get hung up on the numbers. Your dog is the one who is going to tell you what number is appropriate. So let's say, for example, that you are outside and you're walking down the sidewalk, and on the other side of the sidewalk, there is this lady with 3 dogs on a leash, and all of them are barking and screaming at Hank. He's gonna be like super focused on them, and he's gonna be like, why are you screaming at me? And he's gonna look at them, right? And you wanna be able to tap him on the collar and just be like, hey bud, come on, let's go. Because you don't want him to be focused in on that. You wanna continue with your walk. So you wanna tap him on the collar, but his level 5 inside is not gonna be the same when that's very highly motivating and distracting to him. So it doesn't matter what number you're on, you're just gonna slowly go up. And at that moment that he goes, I feel that and I know what that means, mom's getting my attention, then you go, okay, that's the number.
Right.
So it doesn't really matter
so you
what
just
it is.
In a highly, I hate to use the word volatile, but in a volatile situation like that, for example.
Yeah.
You're just scrolling the number.
I'm just scrolling. I'm tapping.
You get reaction out of him.
Yep, pretty much, whatever it may be. And in those really high, I call it highly arousing or overstimulating situations, then it's like, I don't really care. Just like you're going to tell me with your physical communication what that's going to be, right? And then as soon as we move away from that, obviously his state of mind is going to be like, 3 dogs screaming at me. Do I need to protect myself? And then you start to walk, right? His state of mind is going to go down. So let's say that you had to go all the way up to a number like 42, and then you're going to be walking away. You're like, he doesn't need a 42 anymore. So then you just scroll it back down. Right. So I'm consistently like always like scrolling up and down, whatever it may be. So don't get too hung up on the numbers. The next thing that I was going to go over, yes. So when it comes to using our no marker, we want to always preface our dogs that we are going to give them a correction. So this is a correction. And you can only correct something that the subject already knows, the subject being a dog, right? If they don't know it, you have nothing to correct. It's new information. So at this point, you are in a maintenance phase, but we always want to give the dog a chance and an opportunity to correct their behavior, right?
So you're going to give them a no before you're going to give them a correction?
Yes. Because I personally, I think that that's fair for the dog of like you know, you're outside and you're working on stuff and you say sit and he's distracted by someone walking on a bike or something like that. And he's focused on that and, you know, he's looking at them. You would say no, tap on the shoulder, sit, you would recommand him. And then he goes, oh, I know what that is. But you want to give them the opportunity first of like, you say sit, he doesn't, and you say no, and he goes, oh, I know what that means. And he goes, what was it that I was just supposed to do? And then he sits. But you give him the opportunity to correct his behavior. I feel like that's fair, instead of just, you know, you say it once and because he was distracted for whatever reason, to just administer a correction to him. So I do always say no, well, not always. I do say no before you give me a correction. There are a few times that I call non-negotiable behaviors that I do not give a verbal marker before I give a correction. And my non-negotiable behaviors are going to be jumping, counter surfing, destructive chewing, poop eating, leash biting, pretty much any of your behaviors that you never want them to participate in. I typically do not give a verbal marker. You can, it's not gonna mess anything up, but that is the situation where I just never want you to participate in those things. And those things are usually where the correction comes from the source. Let's say that, for example, we worked a lot on his counter surfing. Let's say he goes back home, back from summer camp, and he's like, oh, something smells good up there, I'm going to do it. I want the correction to come from the source. The second your paws come up there, it's not me who's correcting you, the counter is correcting you. You get to the trash can corrects you. The poop corrects you. You breaking the climb command.
No verbal command when you're giving that correction.
No, because it's just one that I want to correct you once and I never want to correct you again. And I want you to create a superstitious association with that of just like the counter is the one that corrected you. Yes, and I'm going to get a correction from that. I never want to participate in that. And here's the really difficult part that it can sometimes feel difficult to do, but it's really, really important that you do it. So this might be a little bit confusing, but just like bear with me for like 2 seconds. So in our training, we use negative reinforcement a lot. All that means is just that when I give you leash pressure, I want you to yield to that leash pressure, right? And that makes the behavior stronger. So if I want to fast it down, I'm going to use leash pressure and the dog goes, I know how to turn off this pressure, so I'll do it quickly, right? So negative reinforcement is not enough to stop the dog from doing anything. It actually creates more powerful and more quick behaviors. So say, for example, you want Hank to come inside and he's not listening to you, you would say, Hank, come. And on a low level of the tap on the shoulder, you would press and hold the continuous stim. And he knows I can turn this pressure off, or pressure being the stim from the e-collar, by successfully completing the command. So continuous stim all the way until he comes all the way to you, and then you turn it off. You can get a very, very powerful, quick, and enthusiastic recall command because the dog's not scared by the stim. He knows what it is and how to turn it off through his behavior.
So at the end of that, is he then rewarded?
Yes.
Okay.
Because that's how you can, that's actually
That's what I'm wondering, like, okay, so I've done this, I've done the come, I've had the stem, I've followed through to make it stop, and now I'm being rewarded.
Yes.
Okay.
So we have our negative reinforcement, which is the stim from the e-collar when we're recalling. When you release the stim, that is positively reinforcing. The release of pressure is a reward. It's a shitty reward, but it is still a reward. And then you follow with positive reinforcement like a treat, and that makes the behavior super, super strong because it teaches the dog through pressure and negative things, I can get a lot of positive. I can get 2 positives. So we use this a lot in sport dog world. So that way when, you know, for police dogs especially, if there is a gunned arm, you know, an armed gunman and he's shooting and stuff like that, and we've trained the dog enough, if you go through the scary situation of the bangs and the loud noises and, you know, all these things happening, you are going to get a lot of reinforcement. You'll be able to bite the guy, and then we'll also give you a reward. And that's how we can get very powerful behaviors. So now let's take this example and apply it to our counter surfing situation, right? So negative reinforcement isn't enough to stop a behavior. You want a very specific thing to happen, okay? So it's not enough to do anything to the dog except for do a specific thing. So let's say that Hank is inside and he goes to do counter surfing. And let's just say, you don't know this, but we'll say from Hank's perspective that a level 60 on the e-collar would have stopped the behavior, and anything less than that would not be enough for him to never participate in the behavior ever again. If you give him a correction at a level 40, let's say, it wasn't enough for him to say, oh, I never want to do that again. He knows, oh, that wasn't too bad. I will totally risk having this at a 40 in order to get my treat. And so then the next time that he goes and do it, he goes, I can push through a level 40. And so you're like, oh, I did it on level 40 last time. I'll try it on a level 50. Well, he already knows I can get through 40. 50 is really not that bad. And over time, you can incrementally get a dog that will completely blow off an entire e-collar, and you'll make a very, very strong behavior. So in our behaviors, we never want the dog to do barking, counter surfing, destructive, you know, whatever, poop eating. We would rather overshoot and do it once and never have to do it again. And in my opinion, it is significantly more fair to the dog, instead of continuously putting them through all of this, to just say, don't do that, and then never having to do it again, right? Instead of being like, oh, I'm gonna ground you for a week. Oh, you did the same thing? A week and 1 day. Oh, you did the same thing? A week and 2 days, right? It's just kind of like, no internet, no cell phone, you're grounded for a month. All right, bud. Let's make sure that you go potty first. All right, let's go potty. So that's his command for being able to leave the heel position, is being it when I say go potty, and then he knows, oh, okay, like now I can go and you know, do whatever.
I know. What is it? I know. Okay,
alrighty, you ready? Heel. Heel, come on. And then you can just walk on my right side of me. And this is probably going to be the most challenging for him, but he's actually doing pretty good. Alrighty, bud. So whenever we start a walk, I usually want to say the word heel. So that way he understands that he's supposed to be on the left-hand side of me. If I change directions, I also want to say the word heel as well. So that way he has a heads up, just kind of like how we say the word no before we give a correction. I want to say the word heel so that way he knows where to go. One of the things that is going to be really helpful for you to practice, especially with Hank, because he does get pretty excited by things in the environment, is something called an attention getter. So I will actually have you wait right here, and I'll kind of show you what that is. So I'm going to continue walking, and if he's going to be really distracted by something, I'm just going to turn and walk the other way, and I'm just going to give him, so I'm a level 6, I'm just going to give him a tap. Good boy. Heel. And if he's not paying attention to me, then he's going to continue to go off. Good boy. Good job. And I just continue to do that. Just a right.
When you're turning?
Yes.
Okay.
But only if he's not focused and engaged on what I'm doing. Okay? Sit. Good. Good boy. So a really easy thing that you can do is for his breakfast, if you just go on a walk, just regular on a walk, he's pretty used to doing that. Hank down. Good. And just being able to feed him his food. And that's what hand feeding is. That's all that it is. Right. Yeah. So now, if you want to come join us for the walk, heel. Good boy. So it will be challenging for you to get used to having the e-collar, to having a leash, and to be having tools on him as well. No, heel. Good boy. So for him, he gets distracted by things in the environment pretty easily. So that's going to be really crucial for you to say no and then give a tap or use the leash. You just kind of give it like a quick, just kind of like pull backwards on the leash. So that way he knows that he's supposed to pay attention. I have found that he's somewhat uncoordinated a little bit with his paws.
You think so?
I don't know if like maybe he'll grow out of that as he gets older. He's still like pretty puppy, but he bumps into you a lot, like in a walk. So just kind of get used to that. So we'll go down to, we'll turn left up here, and then we'll have him go potty, and then I'll have you practice. Left-hand turns are also really, really beneficial because if he, for some reason, continues to get really ahead of you, if you turn left, if he's not in the correct place that he needs to be, he's gonna run into you. So I just do a left-hand turn, and I use the leash to kind of guide him back behind me, and he catches on to that really fast. And you're relax this arm here. There you go, good job. Good job. Do some left turns into him using that left. Yep, there we go. Use that leash to guide him backwards. Good job. Good. Very good. Good job. That was good communication right there. He is happy. Good job. Yep, and you just bump him with your leg a little bit using that physical pressure. That was excellent. I can tell you're already sort of a natural at this, just how your hand was sort of moving to guide him out of the way. All good. Oh, have you ridden horses before? Yeah. Oh, okay, you kind of already understand pressure and release. He is kind of a horse.
Yes, I have to like now not allow my 8-year-old to ride him anymore.
Yeah. He's doing excellent. Do you have any questions?
No.
No? All right, now we're gonna add in the e-collar into your right hand.
Yeah, this should be
there we go.
He's like, feed me, woman.
Good job.
Okay.
And it's kind of natural in your hand of, you know, the thumb scroll and then the 2 buttons on the side. You can use whichever one. The top one is the momentary, the bottom is continuous. He's doing excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Alrighty.
He's like,
Yeah.